Hello and welcome to another episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
And I'm Ginny Dietrich.
And Ginny, I realized before I started working with you on this podcast, I forgot to ask for your references. Maybe I should do that.
Yeah,
Let me go take care of that right now. No, I'm not really going to do that.
My volume was very loud.
Well, hopefully our listeners are not having the same issue.
You're not going to ask for my references? That's good because it's been like, how long has it been? 5 years? I feel like you probably should be one of my references.
It has been almost 5 years. Wow, that's making me feel old, Ginny.
Well, if the shoe fits.
Wow. That's harsh. All right, well, maybe we'll give some harsh advice too today because we're going to be talking about a couple of things that agency owners seem to love. They're always worried about and focused on, but I'm pretty sure that you agree with me that they're not worth the time and money that they take. That's references and case studies. So
yes, indeed.
Let's dump on a few of the popular things in the agency industry once again, shall we?
We're getting good at this. No more RFPs, no more proposals, no more case studies, no more references. Just go win some business. There you go.
Everything that you thought you should be doing as an agency owner, everything that you get told to do by a lot of other advisors, we're telling you, don't.
No more.
Knock it off.
No mas. Yep. As I say to the kids around here, no mas. Let's go. No mas.
All right. So let's start with references. So references, it's incredibly common, really, frankly, in a lot of professional services businesses, but particularly with agencies, for prospective clients to at some point along the way say, do you have any references that I can talk to? Do you have any clients who you've had success with who I could have a conversation with in order to understand how you work, what you do, and whether it's worth my time and money to invest in you?
Yes. And
I was trying to tee you up.
Oh.
Yeah.
Well,
we're running really smoothly today, firing on all cylinders.
I told you I was grumpy today.
Yes, you did.
I did.
But you promised me it wouldn't be directed at me. So
no, it's not directed.
Direct it at the dear listeners.
I will direct it at references and case studies.
Okay.
So I will say that we do provide references if asked. It's not something that we normally hand out just as part of the new business process, but if asked, we do provide them. It has been years since we've been asked for references. And I always have a list of, current and former clients we've had success with. But truth be told, like it's like references with a candidate, right? They're only going to give you the people who are going to say great things about you. So they kind of are a moot point, I think. Like I have a list of probably 7 or 8 that I would refer people to, but they will all say wonderful, raving things about us. They won't say anything negative about us. They won't describe any area that we weren't successful, which I'm sure in some cases we were unsuccessful and made some mistakes, but these are not the references that we use. So just like with candidates, I kind of think they're dumb because you're only going to get the good. You're not going to get the neutral or the negative.
Right. Yeah. Certainly the value of them to this prospective client isn't nearly as high as the prospective client thinks. But I think that one of the reasons why you don't get asked for references all that often goes back to some of the things that we've talked about previously when it comes to winning business, which is that you're not talking to people blind. You're not talking to people through some cold RFP process or some dog and pony show. You're talking to people who have already learned about you before they come into the process. They've consumed content from Spin Sucks. They've heard you speak somewhere. They've listened to this podcast. They have a sense as to who you are. So folks like that have a lot less of a need or a desire to ask you for a reference. So I think if you're frequently getting asked for references, that's probably an indication that you may want to think about how you're warming up your prospects before they get to the sales stage, right? So to me, that's the first thing. The second thing is I have actually come around to the way of thinking that says, just no. If I get asked for a reference now, the answer is just straight up, nope. and I'm pulling from David C. Baker, who has talked about this in the past. If assuming my memory is serving me correctly, and if I'm falsely attributing this to him, my apologies. But I'm pretty sure it's correct, and it sounds like him too.
It does sound like
So
him, yeah.
it does sound like him. So and I believe, if I recall correctly, his position was that you shouldn't provide references because you're asking your current clients, your former clients, to do work on your behalf that's uncompensated, that essentially can turn into free advice for the prospective client. And so those are not things that they signed up for when they became a client of yours. And so for all of those reasons, I have become comfortable now just saying no, and layer it on to the fact that I think we've talked about this before. When I work with people, and this has been true in my agencies as well as now as a coach and consultant, I've always had a 30-day out for clients. So
Right.
the risk to them is very low. And so they're going to find out more in those first 30 days of working with me and my team than anything that they could find out from a reference. Because you're right, nobody's going to give a reference who's going to say, Ginny, God, she was a pain to deal with.
Yeah.
You'd have to
Yeah,
be
you're
crazy
right.
to do that.
So, but I think there's a middle ground here. So two things. One is that you're right. I think that we haven't been asked for references because I spend a huge amount of time building our reputation and our brand. And so we're already well known, right? And so by the time somebody comes to us, they're coming to us based on our reputation. So if you're going to do anything, it's to build your reputation and your brand, and you can do that digitally. You can do it through content. You can do it through social media. There's lots of ways that you can do that. Totally different topic for another time. But if you're going to want to do away with RFPs and proposals and references and case studies, these are the kinds of things that you should do. Build your reputation, build your brand, then your reputation will precede you and you won't be asked for those things. However, if you are asked for references, and I think you have a really good sort of middle ground here, which is ask them for references too. Great. So you've worked with agencies in the past. Let us talk to those agencies. And it's sort of quid pro quo. Quid pro quo.
Right. And again, if my memory is serving me correctly, that's a bit of advice that I heard David C. Baker relay. And again, I agree with that, right? I mean, if because it's just as important for you, and the risk is substantial for the agency in taking on a client who might be a bad fit. So why shouldn't you ask for references in the other direction? If they want your references, let's trade. Let's find out.
Yes.
I mean, frankly, job seekers should probably do the same thing.
Yes.
Right?
Yes.
If the employer is asking you for references, you might as well ask the boss, whoever you're going to be reporting to. I'd like some references on you.
Yep.
Because how many times have we heard horror stories about someone who goes to work for just a bad manager?
Yep.
Maybe you could have found that out in a reference check. Probably not.
Love
Because again,
that.
they're probably going to give people who, think that they were, good managers. So to me, references overall in almost every context are silly. But if you're going to do them, why not trade?
I totally agree with that. And from a candidate perspective, one of the things we do is we do ask for references, and then we look to see where we have first and second connections, especially on LinkedIn, right. And we ask those people.
Right.
So it's less about the people that you're giving us to check, and more about the people that are connected to those people that we can ask. So there are ways that I think you can work around that. I think if you're asking for previous agencies to talk to, you're probably going to get an unfiltered response, which is good. And you should be asking for that, especially if it's a prospect who's been through several agencies in the last couple of years.
I'll be honest, I've never tried this approach, but my personal speculation would be they will immediately fold.
Fair.
And say, well, we don't really need to do this. This is,
And then you're like, okay.
Because, how many times does a client move from one agency to the next and it didn't end at least somewhat poorly?
Right.
More often than not.
Yes.
It ended up not being a fit for some reason. Yes. Otherwise, they would likely still be with them. Now, it's not always the case, and so I'm not always saying that, but more often than not, one side or the other, and probably the agency isn't particularly thrilled with that former client.
Totally agree. Yes.
Yeah. All right. So we've beaten up on references, case studies. This is one I get asked a lot. How many case studies do I need? How detailed should they be? What do I? I was just talking with an agency owner last week who said, I'm looking at the case studies on our website and they're kind of out of date. I know I need to update them. And to that, my question usually is, why? Are people actually reading them? Frankly, my belief is that most prospects aren't reading any of your website, let alone your
Correct.
case studies, let
That's
alone
right.
downloading the more detailed ones
That's
that
exactly
you
right.
provide. So if you've
Yes.
already done them, my first suggestion is to find out, are they even being used? My guess is no. My guess
My,
is you've already put in a
I
lot
can
of work. So
guarantee they're
why
not.
put in
Right.
more work?
Yes. I can guarantee it.
But
I can
but
guarantee it.
but apart from the fact that they're not really consumed, to me the other issue with case studies is it really tries to boil down the entirety of an agency relationship into, one page or a couple of pages, and there's so much more to it. It's cherry picking. I mean, to me, it's like the submission. A case study is kind of like the submissions for an award, right? It's so cherry picked and so distorted that I frankly have yet to see an agency case study that I fully believe. And I don't mean that in the terms of I don't think they achieved good results for the client. I think in most cases they probably did. Otherwise, it would be kind of crazy to go out there and put out a case study for someone that you didn't actually perform for. But are the numbers that are in there, are it's, to me, it's unlikely to be as true as it seems because of the way it gets boiled down.
So I am going to give you some advice that I got when I started speaking publicly to groups of people. I was working with a speech coach, and he said, a speaking coach, not a speech coach. And he said, I know how to speak. He said to me, instead of providing a case study, here's what's more effective. Like when you're in a new business meeting and you're having conversation and you ask a question and they say, well, what we're really struggling with is how to drive leads from our content. And you can say, oh, great. In our experience with such and such organization, here's what we did. Boom, 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 boom. So you talk through how you solved that pain and what kinds of results you got. And it works great in speaking too, because when you're speaking to large audiences, all of a sudden they start thinking, oh, she can help me with that. I didn't even realize I had that pain, but now that she says that. So when you're speaking, that's a great tactic. But also when you're one-on-one in new business meetings, you can use that tactic as well. So instead of having something that's downloadable and beautiful that nobody ever reads, you have the conversation because you're asking the questions. You're asking, what are your major pain points? Why are you not working with your former agency? What are you looking for? When you're asking those kinds of questions, you can answer or have conversation with them by sprinkling in your experience without having to have them download something that's big and beautiful and read it, because they're just not going to do it.
Well, and the beauty is that it's much more relevant because you're being contextual to the actual conversation that you're having.
Yes.
So you're not cherry picking something that, oh, well, this is one that I've got permission to use it. And, the logo is one that people will respond to, and all of the things that go into deciding what case studies you're going to actually publish. Because in those conversations, you can often share things that you couldn't publish on your website.
Right.
You can make it very relevant. By the way, it doesn't require any prep, or shouldn't, because you should remember the things that you've done for clients in the past.
Yeah.
And so you shouldn't need to prep or study because it should just be top of mind because you're an expert and you're sharing your expertise. And if you are in a position with a client where they say, here's my problem, and you're like, I have no idea how to solve it, you probably shouldn't be trying to pitch them on that solution then.
Probably.
You should probably be trying to find something that is a fit instead of trying to make something up or say, well, I have to go figure that one out. Or, I mean, that doesn't mean you have all of the answers all of the time. Sometimes a prospect does stump you with something, but, hopefully you can still tie it back in general terms to something that you've done previously. And so it demonstrates your expertise, your ability to think on your feet, your ability to provide solutions that are good fits for them, and it demonstrates that you've done it successfully in the past. So that is a much, much better way of going about things than spending hours and hours and hours fretting over case studies and getting permissions, and then, oh my God, that client is left. Do we need to take down their case study?
Right.
Do we need to come up with a new one now? Oh my God, now we've only got one case study on the website. Now I got to hurry up and get two more. I mean, it just, the craziness around case studies just blows my mind. You could spend that time so much more valuably from a business development standpoint. You could actually, I don't know, talk to people.
Yeah, right. You're right in that this goes to award entries as well. And I forgot that in my list of things, we're no longer doing award entries as well. But that's usually why you create a case study, right? Is to submit it to an award entry. But I'm telling you, nobody reads it. And actually 3 years ago, we had one client, a big, huge client of ours on the agency side that had tons and tons of written case studies, and they wanted to update them when we were like, let's look and see. And this is not an agency owner. This is a corporation, a software as a service corporation. I said, let's look and see what kinds of results you're getting from these case studies. And it was tiny, negligible. It was like nothing. So what we did is we took all of that and we chopped it up into smaller pieces. In some cases, we created videos, 30-second videos, where we went back to the client and we said, hey, we did this case study with you several years ago. We'd love to just have you say this quote that you have in here on video. And then we use that in email and in content. And we took all the case studies and we parceled it up into smaller pieces of content that we shared in email and on social media. And that worked incredibly well, but it was bite-sized chunks, and it wasn't something they had to download. It was something that arrived in their email as they're thinking about, is this company a company I want to work with? So it was part of our lead nurturing program, and it worked incredibly well. But bite-sized, like 30-second videos, one paragraph copy, like teeny tiny things that were easy to consume either on social media or email. And that works incredibly well. But these huge case studies that are 4 pages with problem, solution, tactics, and results.
Right. I mean, the problem is that both sides in the business development equation do a lot of things that aren't particularly useful, but consume a lot of time. Right? So when you've got a prospect who's asking you for references or case studies or those kinds of things, a lot of that is because they're not ready to make a decision yet. And it's a way to continue to move, to sort of kick the can down the road without just saying to you, it's going to be another month before we have some idea, right? They come up with something that prolongs the process and keeps it moving forward because they just haven't decided to pull the trigger, but they don't want to either say no or it's going to be a while because it's uncomfortable to say those things. On the agency side, references get developed, case studies get developed, credentials decks get worked on, the website gets updated. All of those things happen in part because people think there is value there, but in part because it's a way to confront your business development problem without having to actually go out and talk to people.
You're right.
And so it becomes a way to feel like you're doing something. I know I've got a business development issue. I know I've got to get revenue. I'm going to do these things because they do contribute to revenue. And they kind of do. But you know what? If you didn't have a credentials deck or a website or a case study or references, if you just reached out and started to talk to people in your network, you would have a much better chance of closing new business than any of those other things would do. So focus on those only after everything else is firing on all cylinders.
And only if you're asked, because you're not going to be asked. Nobody wants to see your 4-page case study. They don't.
Right. And it really is a proxy for saying, I don't trust your expertise.
Right.
And so what you need to do is figure out how to demonstrate your expertise to them in another way that's more fruitful. And so inviting a conversation where you talk about what their challenges are and you can share specific examples of how you've addressed that in the past or how you've seen that same challenge and that they're not alone, that you know this is something that needs to be worked on. All of that helps a lot more than having some canned case study that appeals to 2% of your prospects and 1/10 of those people, so whatever that is, 0.2%, actually end up downloading it. And even when they download it, they don't read it.
They don't read it. No one reads it.
You're at 0 people who have read it.
Right.
It's like half these websites that I get asked to look at. Can you look at the copy on my website? I'll look at the headline, the headings, right? Because that's all anybody's looking. Nobody is reading the paragraph text on your website.
That's right.
Nobody.
The Google spiders are, so you should do it for that. But you're right.
Absolutely.
Human beings.
And so it needs to be human readable for that one strange bird who does decide to read it, right? So you don't want it to read like SEO copy. But the reality is there's no need to perfect that wordsmithing because nobody is going to read it.
Yes.
Frankly, you're probably not reading it yourself. So
right. That's fair. No more RFPs.
At least I hope you didn't, based on some of the copy issues that I've seen on some websites.
Oh dear. Maybe mine. No more RFPs, no more proposals, no more references, no more case studies, no more awards, no more credential stacks. 6 things you no longer have to do to win.
See, we've just freed up so much time for agency owners. And how often do you hear from an agency owner that they just don't have enough time in the day? All the time. We just solved that for you. We just cleared up hours and hours every month for you. So with that will draw to an end this episode of the Agency Leadership Podcast. I'm Chip Griffin.
I'm Jenny Dietrich.
And it depends.